at 10 with Trevor McDonald.
The class that died, massacred by a crazed gunman. Parents in anguish as the grim news spread. The killer was a local man with a known grudge. Tonight, a traumatized community is changed forever. Good evening. In 3 appalling minutes today, in the small city of Dunblane in central Scotland, 16 children were murdered. A former scout leader with a grudge walked into their primary school gymnasium with 4 handguns and, without warning, opened fire. The children who died were all 5- and 6-year-olds. Their teacher, Gwen Mayer, seen here with her class in the autumn, was also killed. Almost all the children in the picture who weren't killed were wounded, some seriously. The killer, Thomas Hamilton, finally shot himself dead. He was known to the authorities as an unstable loner, and schools had been warned not to let him onto their premises. ITN and Scottish television camera crews went to Dunblane just after the massacre and had been there all day. Colin Baker has the full story.
The school lights burn bright tonight. The police haven't finished their work, but they too join with the rest of Dunblane in feeling dazed and numb. After the sound of gunfire, confusion and bewilderment, and the anxiety of waiting for news. A stricken crowd of parents waiting in dread to be told who lived and who died.
Hiya, how are you? Hiya.
Okay, here's a cup.
Relief for some. Others had to wait. And the constant quest for answers, for any information. But for a while there were no answers, just shock. The ambulances were still leaving, driving to hospital, going past parents who'd just heard, mothers and fathers running towards school. For some there was to be good news, but not for the parents of 16 youngsters. And the waiting went on, the community verging on the edge of despair. There were precious moments of indescribable relief for those who found their children safe, frightened, but alive. These are the ones tonight who may give thanks. Evil touched them, but just brushed past. It was in this building, close to the school, that the answers for some finally came. Fears exploded into reality. The utter heartbreak of Dunblane exposed. There should have been the sound of playground laughter in the air, but not after this morning. This school governor arrived in the building just after the shooting.
And I didn't know what was happening, and I just wandered into the school. I noticed it was very quiet. I walked into the nursery class and I knew there was something badly wrong, but I didn't know what it was. Mrs. Iles just asked me to come in, and just sat, and when I got a chance I asked her what was going on, and she told me there's a man had gone mad in the gym and shot. She had heard it was a teacher and a pupil, and then we just spent the next, I don't know how long it was, just waiting, wandering, trying to keep the children unaware that there's anything wrong. And Mrs. Iles was called out of the classroom to help to go to the gym. And I just found out that at that stage I knew it was primary 1, and then I found out that it wasn't my daughter's class, and I felt relieved, and then I felt terribly guilty that I felt relieved.
This pupil was in a nearby classroom.
We saw him firing at something. We didn't know what it was, though.
Through the window of the gym, you could see this?
Yes.
Yeah.
This man came to search for his niece and found her.
There was a lot of pandemonium. You know, everyone was shouting and screaming and that. And then we just got told to queue. They got told what class it was involved to go into a different building. So we knew then that they were safe.
What was the reaction of those poor parents who had to go to the other building?
Just sheer shock. I couldn't believe it. They were, really shocked.
The Scottish Secretary, Michael Forsyth, was shocked when he went to Dunblane.
I can't find the words to express the horror at what has happened in Dunblane here today. It's the last place in the world that one would expect a tragedy of this kind to occur, if one would expect it anywhere at all.
Shadow Scottish Secretary and local MP George Robertson lives in Dunblane. He talked, his voice barely under control.
All of my children went to this school. It's an act of unspeakable brutality and evil. And it's just difficult, I think, for anyone here and in the wider world to come to terms with what's happened in this primary school here today.
Quiet Dunblane, a numb community tonight, a place previously for perhaps those in the autumn of their lives to retire to, not a place for 16 little school chums and their teacher to die together. And now, of course, the task of looking for a reason, because surely there must be a reason. But how do you explain, they say, how do you explain something that is so inexplicable? Colin Baker, News at 10, Dunblane.
A full-scale medical emergency was launched as soon as the extent of the tragedy became known. The timetable of events began at 8:45. 720 pupils arrived at Dunblane Primary School. At 9, classes began. By 9:15, 29 first-year children, aged between 5 and 6, were gathering in the school's gymnasium with their teacher. Around 9:30, the gunman walked through the school's main entrance, crossed the assembly hall, and entered the gym. He then opened fire. 3 minutes later, 15 children and their teacher lay dead. 13 others were injured, 1 fatally, and the gunman had shot himself. Minutes later, the police received their first call. By 9:44, the first police officer had arrived. And at 9:56, the first of 15 ambulances also arrived at the school. 2 of the wounded children, a boy and a girl, were flown to hospital in Glasgow, where their condition tonight is described as critical but stable. But most, along with 2 wounded women teachers, went to Stirling Royal Infirmary. ITN's Steve Scott reports from there.
A siren signalling the arrival of another child with bullet wounds. Doctors from all the city's health centres had rushed to the school to give what treatment they could, until paramedics arrived to ferry them under police escort to the nearby Stirling Infirmary. Medical staff from around the region were drafted in to increase the number of emergency teams here. Tonight, a consultant paediatrician, one of the first at the school gym, described the scene that confronted him.
The children were very quiet, but of course they had all been injured. And so they were in shock both because of the injuries and presumably also emotional shock. We as professionals are trained to deal with injuries in children and adults, so we got on with it. We went on to autopilot and did our job.
Some of the youngsters were transferred to York Hill Hospital in Glasgow. One 5-year-old boy's injuries typified what surgeons were faced with.
The boy, who is the more seriously ill, has injuries to his foot, to his chest, and to one of his eyes. He is seriously ill, but in a stable condition at present.
Psychologists say today's events will live with those touched by them forever.
These are not things that people ever forget. They become part of them. But there is no reason why the wider group of people should be, if you like, scarred terribly over time by this. It's a different matter for those who are more closely involved, and I do not know as a parent how parents begin to come to terms with bereavement like this.
Tonight, parents are at the bedsides of 4 boys and a girl. 2 adults are being treated here too. 2 of the boys are in the intensive care unit. Their injuries are described as life-threatening. Steve Scott, News at 10, Stirling.
The killer, himself now dead, was quite soon identified as Thomas Hamilton, a bachelor from Stirling. What's emerged since is that he'd been brought up believing his mother to be his sister, that he'd been expelled from the Scout movement and had complained to Buckingham Palace about it only last week, and that he'd been refused membership of at least 1 gun club. Richard Lindley has been piecing together the life of a killer.
These pictures from an amateur video are of Thomas Hamilton teaching gymnastics to children, a terrible reminder of the setting for today's massacre in Dunblane. What was today called an act of unspeakable brutality and evil was planned here in this modest street by a former scoutmaster who today became a mass murderer.
I can't remember if it's...
In Glasgow, not far away, ITN's Home Affairs correspondent Harry Smith spoke to Hamilton's mother, Agnes.
Is he an even-tempered sort of person? Was he prone to get angry?
Well, I've never known him to be angry.
You can't think of any reason why he might have a grudge against the school?
No. Because he seemed to get on with everybody that I know of.
Had he not been in trouble, though, because of the clubs that he runs for young boys?
No. No, that I know of.
You didn't know that he kept lots of photographs?
Oh, I know he's got photographs of the boys when they're out camping and things like that. But I never thought for 1 minute that he would do anything like that.
So who was this man? Name, Thomas Hamilton, age 43. In July 1973, he became a scout leader, but was thrown out in March 74 for his behaviour with young boys at a camp. 5 days ago, he wrote to the Queen complaining about not being allowed to rejoin the Scouts. He started more boys' clubs, but many parents withdrew their children, unhappy at the way they were treated. He was a keen photographer and had many photographs of children in his house. A month ago, he was refused membership of a local gun club. This is where Thomas Hamilton lived, at number 7 Kent Road, Stirling. And this morning he left here, apparently quite normal, waving his hands to neighbours, relaxed, apparently at ease. Kathleen Kerr saw Hamilton set off this morning. He often popped in for a coffee. Someone likeable?
Yes.
Got on with?
Yes.
Happy to have in the house?
Aye.
Nice man.
Very nice, I thought.
Yet this was the man who this morning armed himself with 4 handguns and set off to slaughter the innocent. Richard Lindley, News at 10,